Dad came to my apartment with toys for 2 young kids. I do not have any kids. I, 25F, do not have kids and have never been married. My dad, 49M, came to my apartment with gifts for 2 very young kids, and just exploded when I tried to ask what he was talking about. Long time lurker, first time posting. I am coming to you, the brains of Reddit that always find some angle I never considered, because my dad did something so wild yesterday and I am spinning myself in circles about it. I'm trying to settle on an answer but nothing really adds up. I'll break it down as thoroughly as I can, but my family has enough drama that it could fill 10 novels, so I'll be very to the point about it. So I will reiterate, again, that I do not have any kids and am not married. I have never been married, never even moved in with a man. Here are the people I can think of that might be involved in this, somehow. I have one brother, 27M, and one sister, 22F. Brother is in a long-term relationship with a nice woman, but they're both not interested in kids right now. Sister still lives at our mom's house, no kids, no long-term partner. My parents are divorced and my mom remarried, dad stayed single. He lives with my uncle, 40s, M, and uncle's wife, 40s. F, stepdad is fine, they got married after I was out of the house. Sister reports that they're normal and beige together. He has no kids and has never met my dad anyways, so his family can be removed from the equation. Here's what happened. I have a shitty, low-rent apartment about 45 minutes away from my dad's house. It's on the 3rd floor, and you have to walk into the apartment building and up flights of stairs to reach my door. Yesterday around 6 p.m. my dad knocks on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting him, so when I answered I was confused but pleasantly surprised. I greeted him normally and he gave me a side hug because he had a few toy boxes in his hands. Like Fisher-Price toys for really young kids, even babies. I didn't say anything about them because I had no reason to assume they were for me, like I just didn't even register them in my brain. He looked totally normal. He wasn't breathing weird, wasn't sweaty, his pupils weren't huge, nothing was off with him visually. When we hugged I didn't smell anything weird, no alcohol or smoke or anything, but my face wasn't too close to him. I said I was happy he dropped by, but why is he here? He said he was in the area shopping when saw these toys, which he then held up for me proudly, and wanted to give them to the girls. I said who? And he gave me 2 names I didn't recognize. I remember my brain sorting through the Rolodex of everyone I've ever met in our family Terminator style and nobody matched. As I'm standing there trying to match the names to any kids I knew of, he peeks over my shoulder into the apartment and asks if the kids are here or if they're with Mike. Again, who is that? Apparently it's my husband. I must have been radiating confusion since now my dad is looking just as confused as I am, but still keeping up a good mood kind of vibe. I tell him I am not married and have no kids. At first, he insisted I did, and when I reiterated that he just kind of shook his head. At this point I'm getting really concerned. Is my dad lost? Confused? Is he having some kind of breakdown? I ask my dad if he knows where he is. He starts to get frustrated really quickly and confirms that yes, he knows where he is and who I am. I start to ask him questions that I've seen in movies like, do you know what time it is? Or the year? And he just gets more and more angry. He starts shouting at me right in my face, yelling. You think this is funny? And are you trying to make me look stupid? There's bubbles of spit in the corners of his mouth. He went from 0 to 100 so fast it genuinely kind of scared me and I just retreated a bit into my apartment. When I backed away he took it as a personal offense and started screaming, oh now you're scared. You're scared of me? Guess I'll just fuck off then. He storms off, literally stomping his feet like a child down the hallway. I thought about chasing him but he was so irate that I didn't think it was a smart move. Whole interaction was less than 5 minutes. I closed and locked my door and immediately start making phone calls. Called my mom, uncle, and siblings. Nobody has any idea what just happened. I did ask my mom and sister if I was the crazy one and did have children I just forgot about. They confirmed I certainly didn't. Uncle says that dad left the house around 4 p.m. to run errands in my area, so that part was true. I told him what happened and he said he'd try to figure out what's going on and would call with updates. It's tomorrow morning and I haven't heard anything back. I spent all night trying to figure this out. Here are my theories. He has another kid somewhere that none of us know about, and that kid is married with 2 kids. But if that's true, why my apartment? Did he confuse me with his other, hidden kid? He confirmed he knew where he was, so LM not sure. Did he drive here on autopilot? He'd have to get out of his car and walk all the way up here though, which should have been enough time to snap out of it. The anger might have come from him realizing what he'd done and panicking, but it would have been so easy to make up a lie about what happened. He had some kind of mental breakdown. This was my first thought, but he looked and acted so normal. He drove out here and went to a store and purchased items without issue, so he must have been in decently sound mind to do that. Maybe he was somewhere else in his mind? I considered the idea that he was maybe in the past and thought I was someone else, but again he confirmed where he was and who I was, and I didn't recognize any of the names as anyone in our family. He did this on purpose for some reason. I have no idea why he would do this. Drama? Our whole family loves to stir the pot, but this is extreme, and makes him look bad, which is out of character. If he were to manufacture drama, he'd want to make himself look good, so this would be a drastic switch in his dramatics. Maybe sympathy? Maybe he's going to play this up as some kind of stress breakdown? As far as I know, his job doesn't squeeze him too much. He's had the same position for years and was pretty happy with it. The most he complained about was having to work overtime every once in a while. He's developing dementia. I know early onset dementia could be the cause, but he's just barely 50. Yeah, he's getting older, but not that old, and he's never shown any signs of cognitive failure up until this exact point. This is a huge escalation from nothing. If anyone else has any idea what is happening here, please share. Uncle has yet to call me back and my siblings can't get through to my dad's phone. I think it's dead. I left a voicemail and texts on my uncle's line, but who knows if he's seen them. I don't have any authority in his life, the only one that does is my brother, and he lives in another state, so it's not like he can help much. What the fuck happened to my dad? Update, 2 days later. TLDR, located my dad, I'm with him in the hospital. He has serious brain damage from a fall. I don't think he fell, but what do I know? Hi everyone. I wanted to wait until I had more information to post an update, but a lot of people were seriously worried about my dad and I, so I wanted to let everyone know what happened. I finally found my dad. My uncle took him to the hospital the night of the incident, and was, for reasons I'll get to, ignoring our calls and texts. Anyone who bet on head injury and drugs, you're correct. You can cash out your chips at the front counter, haha. There was no second family. I wish there was. My dad would just be in drama-related trouble and not medical trouble. He's got a massive concussion and serious brain damage. Doctors don't know how he managed to even drive to my apartment safely. They think he was on autopilot, since he takes that freeway nearly every day. The phantom kids are his co-workers. His brain somehow blended the details of his co-worker's life into his own. Co-worker has a daughter who is married and has 2 kids, and the memories of being told about the girls mashed together with memories of his own daughter. Doctor says this is pretty common with head injuries. My uncle did find my dad and take him to the hospital. He did drive out to my area and scour the place looking for my dad, and eventually found his car outside Walmart around 10 p.m. Couldn't find him outside, but did find him out behind the building, harassing an employee for a cigarette. He grabbed my dad and kind of dragged him into the car and took him to the hospital. He just decided not to update anyone because he didn't want to stress us out. I don't believe him at all. I think my uncle is responsible for what happened to my dad and was avoiding us out of guilt. After I posted here, I went to work, and once I was clocked out I went to my dad/uncle's place. Dad and uncle's cars were gone, only my aunt's was there. I went and knocked but nobody answered. People in my last post mentioned carbon monoxide poisoning, and I was kind of freaking out thinking my aunt was just fucking dead inside, so I went around the house testing the doors and windows to see if I could get in. The back door was unlocked, so I just let myself inside and looked around. Totally empty. I even checked underneath the bed since a couple people mentioned my dad could be paranoid or scared and hiding. My aunt has this giant purse and it wasn't there, which confirmed to me that she was probably with my uncle. I went back and sat in my car and started calling any hospitals and jails that came up on Google Maps. Nobody had any answers and just said he wasn't there. I even called the cops for a wellness check just to see if maybe they could call around hospitals and get a different answer, but I waited until 11 p.m. and literally nobody came. No police, no family, nobody. I drive back home and try to get some sleep. Next day I call out of work and spend the day driving around my area trying to find my dad. Couldn't track him down, so I start calling hospitals again. There's 3 in my area, and while 2 of them gave me no, he's not here, sorry, one of them got really nervous over the phone and said I'm not supposed to give out patient information. I got suspicious. Kept asking and she just got more and more flustered. Hung up and drove my ass over there, and saw my uncle's car in the parking lot. It was kind of late, the sun was down, but I wasn't keeping track of time, so there were only like 5 cars in the visitor area and his was one of them. I do not have words to describe what I was feeling, but it was mostly just rage. Like, what the fuck? Hello? He's been here the whole time? I went in and tried to get the receptionist to let me see my dad. She didn't really want to let me, and I'm not proud of it, but Elle started freaking out. I slammed my hands on the desk, screamed, knocked over a magazine rack. I guess my tantrum made someone go talk to my uncle and aunt since she came out to the waiting room and told the receptionist it was fine to let me through. If she didn't look so tired and sad I was going to maul her, but the look on her face made me calm down, if you can call it that. Long story short, she took me to my dad's room. He looked terrible. None of you know my dad, but he's a beast. He's 5 feet 11 inches with massive smile lines and bright, shining eyes. He's my dad, so LM biased, but he's always so full of life. Laying in that hospital bed, he looked dead already. Sunken eyes, lifeless and droopy face. He looked empty. I was able to talk to him for a bit, but he was totally out of it. He had to be reminded who I was several times and kept forgetting where he was and why he was here. Just like my dad, when I get upset, I get angry. I practically dragged my uncle out of the room and into the hallway for an explanation. After like 20 minutes of him making excuses and beating around the bush, another reason I think he's guilty, he told me what happened. Apparently Monday morning, my dad fell getting out of his car and cracked his head really hard against the driveway. He got up and everyone thought he was fine, so they just went inside the house as normal. After a while he had a headache, so they gave him a couple prescription painkillers to ease the pain. Apparently that worked, so they just let him continue his day as normal. They only got concerned when I called and told my uncle what happened. He kept being so weird and evasive that I know there's more, but I couldn't wring his stupid fucking neck in the hospital hallway, so I just let it go. Here's what I think happened. I know my uncle and dad, and I know the history of this stupid family like the back of my hands. I think my dad and uncle got in a fight over something, and dad was either pushed down or hit in the head by my uncle. The altercation gets resolved somehow and they go back to normal, but my dad's head still hurts. I learned at the hospital from the doctor that there were enough painkillers in his body to numb a horse, so I suspect my aunt and uncle just kept feeding him painkillers so they wouldn't need to take my dad to the hospital and admit what they did. I pressed my aunt about the painkillers and she eventually halfway admitted that they weren't exactly allowed to have them at all. I suspect she bought them off someone else. They're likely addicted and I just didn't know. I'm almost 100% sure this is their fault. If they had taken my dad to the hospital as soon as he hit his head, he would probably be okay. I'm staying at the hospital now and my aunt and uncle have left. Doctor says to not get my hopes up about my dad. But when doctors say that, it always means he'll actually be okay, right? That's how it always goes. They tell you that your family member probably won't make it, but they always prove them wrong. I'm sorry, but the rest of this is just going to be venting. You know what really gets me? I could handle all this, I could understand it. My uncle and aunt have always been less than reliable. I can believe that this could come from them. The hardest part is the lack of concern from literally anyone but me. I had to blackmail my brother, drama from a year ago, to even get him to agree to fly out. My mom doesn't care. Dad's family doesn't care. My sister kind of cares, but she doesn't really want to help, or even come support me in the hospital with him. I am just so shocked that I'm the only motherfucker here for my dad, and he doesn't even know who I am right now. I have to take time off work, but it's not like my job gives me PTO. I'm fucked. My dad is fucked. My life is fucked. Why am I the only one dealing with this? My brother is the only one of us with time and money to help fix this, and I had to threaten him just to get him to come back home. I wish I had chased my dad when he left my apartment. I was afraid of him, but I'm even more afraid now. My dad is probably going to die and I trusted the jackass who killed him with helping him. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with everyone? Why doesn't anyone give a shit about my dad? Why doesn't anyone give a shit about me? I could have been a better daughter to him. I could have visited more, called more, involved him in things more. I could have chased him when he left my apartment. I might have gotten hurt, but I would rather be beaten to a pulp rather than be sitting in a hospital room with my unconscious and probably dying father. I'm so fucking stupid. I'm sorry, Dad. Mill tried to force feed me a cake that I'm deathly allergic to at her 25th anniversary party. Now she's regretting it because of what Phil did. I, 27F, got married to my husband Frank, 30M, about a year ago after being together for 2 years. I've met his family plenty of times and we all used to get along until recently, when he and I were visiting his parents and the conversation somehow turned to kids and I casually mentioned that I wasn't interested in being a mother. My husband and I have obviously talked about this before and both of us are on the same page about kids, that we don't want kids. My mother-in-law Sharon, 52F, was the one who initiated the conversation at dinner that day, and when my husband and I made it known that we weren't planning on having kids ever, she tried to change our minds, especially mine. She continued to try and convince me to have kids at some point for the next couple of days until I told her that I wasn't interested and that neither was my husband. So that was it, and I didn't want to discuss this further. I made my boundaries clear and I guess she couldn't handle it because after that she started being really cold to me and would act weird every time I came around. My father-in-law, Ben, 53M, didn't seem to care much, which was a relief. I did discuss Sharon's behavior with Frank, but he told me that she was just upset and would come around eventually because it's not like she had a choice. It wasn't her place to dictate whether we should have kids or not, so she could act upset, but it wasn't going to change our decision. I felt better after talking about it to Frank, and since we still had to continue visiting his parents because Ben wasn't keeping well, I decided not to make a big deal out of it and tried my best to be polite and cordial with Sharon. Even though she didn't extend the same courtesy to me. Now, a few days ago, we attended the 25th wedding anniversary, and it had been organized by Frank's older brother, who's a surgeon. So he was able to throw a very lavish and fancy party and invited almost everybody that we knew, including my parents. We were all having a great time at the party, even though Sharon was giving me the cold shoulder. I wasn't particularly bothered by it and went on having fun with my husband and my parents. Then it was finally time to cut the cake, which I knew I wouldn't be able to have because it was a chocolate peanut butter cake and I had a deathly allergy to peanuts, or nuts of any kind, for that matter. And it was a pretty nutty cake, which goes perfectly with Sharon's personality, now that I think of it. She cut the cake along with Ben and we all clapped. It was a beautiful moment. Then everybody was served with a slice of the cake, but I obviously didn't take any and nobody questioned it, since everyone was well aware of my allergies. I didn't even mind not having cake, but for some reason, as soon as Sharon saw me sitting on my own without cake, she made a huge deal of walking over to me and asking me if I wasn't feeling up to it. She told me to have a bite of her slice, which I politely declined, and I found it very weird that she was even offering me because she knew that I was allergic. She insisted again and again that I take one bite at the very least, while I kept refusing and even told her that I was allergic and I physically couldn't have that cake. She tried to tell me that it wouldn't hurt if I had just one tiny, little bite, but I wasn't willing to risk it. After almost 1 minute of back and forth, she exclaimed, "Oh, just take a bite," and before I could react, she smashed the cake into my mouth. I spit it all out immediately and I had to grab a tissue from Frank so I could get any remnants out of my mouth immediately. It was disgusting and I was actually sputtering while rinsing my mouth, while Frank yelled at his mother. After half a minute, when I finally got over the shock of what she did, I came back to talk to Sharon and told her off. I yelled at her and said that what she did just now was psychotic and I was never going to come back here again because there was something very wrong with her. I also told her that just because I wasn't willing to have kids, didn't mean that she was going to treat me however she wanted to and I was going to take it. I didn't care about what her opinion was on whether I should have a child or not. What mattered was my opinion and Frank's opinion, and trying to force an allergy reaction just because I wasn't going to give her grandchildren was textbook psychotic behavior. I knew what her behavior was really about and I wanted to let her know that I wasn't intimidated by her in the least. She tried to defend herself and said that she just didn't know that my allergies were that serious. That was a total and blatant lie because she'd known me for almost 3 years now and had cooked many meals for me. She knew that I was allergic to all sorts of nuts and nobody was buying that excuse, that she didn't know. I told her that I didn't believe a word she was saying and called her a crazy liar. Then she lost her temper and said that she didn't believe me either, neither about the allergies nor about the fact that her son wasn't willing to have kids. Because he knew that she wanted to be a grandma and he would never deprive her of a joy like that. She accused me of faking my allergies for attention and said that I probably wasn't willing to have kids, and had turned her son against the idea as well, only because I might be infertile. And that pushed me to the edge, so I grabbed a chunk of cake from Frank's plate and smashed it on her face, and asked how she liked it. After that, I stormed out without waiting for anyone, got into my car, and thankfully, Frank was just behind me with my parents. They got in as well and we drove back home quietly. I dropped my parents at their place and then Frank and I headed home. It was a completely silent car ride and even after we got home, we didn't say anything to each other for an hour or so. I guess Frank was waiting for me to calm down before he came in and spoke to me. In the evening, he made me some coffee and we finally sat together in the living room and he brought up what had happened at the party. I started off by apologizing to him, even though it wasn't my fault, but I still felt embarrassed for acting the way I did. And he told me that it was fine because he knew that I wasn't the one to blame. He then went on to tell me that the people who'd stayed back at the party were the ones who filled him in on what happened after we left. Apparently, Sharon started crying after Frank walked out and chose to follow me instead of staying back to see her. She was playing the victim and her family was lapping it all up, calling me the most derogatory names in the book and accusing me of trying to take Frank away from her. The only one who called her out on her BS was Ben, surprisingly. Since he usually tended to stay away from family drama, especially when it involved his wife. But this time he stood up for us and told Sharon that she had nobody else to blame but herself for Frank walking out on her. Because she'd always been a control freak and couldn't stand it whenever somebody tried to do anything that didn't align with her plans. They got into a bad fight and everybody just waited around awkwardly, while they argued with each other. Sharon accused him of choosing me over her and said that he was being unreasonable, but Ben stuck to his guns and didn't back down. They just went on arguing until Frank's older brother finally broke them up, and everybody went home after that because the day was pretty much ruined. One of Frank's cousins recorded the fight and it was nice to see Ben sticking up for us. She and a couple of other relatives are the only ones on our side right now. Frank's brother thinks that I should apologize because he believes that I overreacted. And that I shouldn't have brought up my personal grudges against Sharon on the day of their anniversary and made it all about myself. And not just him, but Sharon's family also feels the same way and is saying that I owe them an apology because the fight wasn't even about us having kids or anything else in the first place. I made it about that. They think that I shouldn't have brought it up, and if I had been that offended by Sharon trying to force me to eat cake, then I should have just walked out after that, instead of retaliating and creating a whole scene. They believe that I was the reason that Ben and Sharon ended up fighting, and had I just done the right thing and walked off, then nobody would have had to deal with that fight later. Frank told his brother off and said that I wasn't going to apologize because none of this was my fault. But all of them are pretty convinced that I'm the culprit and I ruined Sharon's anniversary party on purpose and caused Ben and Sharon to fight on their anniversary. From what they told me, the two of them aren't even talking right now, since Sharon packed a few of her things and went to live with a friend of hers after their big fight. Ben hasn't even tried to call her back. So Ida for fighting with my mother-in-law on the day of her anniversary for trying to force feed me cake? Update 1. Hey, thank you for all the comments. Frank and I are really grateful for all the support and the overwhelming number of people who commented to tell us that we are indeed not the ones at fault here. I did feel a tiny bit responsible when I learned that Ben and Sharon weren't even on talking terms after they fought. But after reading the comments, I realized that this wasn't my fault. It was Sharon's fault. She ruined her own party by making it all about me. To be precise, she didn't even make it about me. She made it about her issues with me, which is even worse because that day was supposed to be a celebration of her marriage to her husband. She chose to try and force feed me a cake that she knew very well I was allergic to, just for the heck of it. And then when the situation got worse, she started crying and playing the victim as if she wasn't the one trying to trigger an allergic reaction, only because I'd told her that I wasn't going to give her grandkids. And it isn't even as if I owe her grandkids, nobody does. She ruined her own party, period. I don't owe her anything, not an apology, and definitely not grandchildren. It's been a few days and Frank's brother and a couple of other relatives of his have been texting him almost every day to give him unnecessary updates on how Sharon is doing. Which is almost always a reminder that she's miserable and a way to tell us that we're the reason behind her misery. He hasn't replied to any of them and is just ignoring it all, but he hasn't blocked them either because he thinks that Sharon might snap and go crazy and he'd want updates for when that happens. In case it's a little too intense for them to handle, if y'all know what I mean. Meanwhile, Ben's been doing just fine. We went over to his place the other day to see how he's been and he appears to be completely unbothered by Sharon leaving. He told us that, for a long time, he hadn't said anything to her even though he could tell that she was becoming a little too overbearing and controlling and could predict that at some point, either Frank or I were going to snap at her. He tried to warn her several times in person but she'd just never listen, and when she started crying at the party after we left, he couldn't take it because he could just see through her so clearly and knew that she was trying to gain sympathy after screwing up. So he called her out on her BS, and as usual, she couldn't handle the truth, so she left. He told us that he knows she expects him to reach out to her first and apologize for the way he behaved, but he's not going to do that anymore. Because he says he's too old to constantly be sorry for speaking his mind. And if after 25 years of marriage, she still can't handle this sort of candor, then they probably shouldn't be married. Update 2. So, a couple of things happened after that last update. Firstly, Sharon reached out to Frank to demand an explanation for why he was visiting Ben but not her. I guess the neighbors must have seen us come and snitched on us or something. Frank told her that since this fight was actually her fault, he figured that his father would need him more than she would. Because she's just upset for sympathy and we can see through that act now. She got offended by that and they had an argument on the phone, and for some reason, she started accusing me of turning him against her. As if she doesn't do that job well enough herself. She told Frank that this was all my doing and she knew it. And even when Frank tried to tell her that I had nothing to do with this, and these were his own personal opinions, she wouldn't hear it and insisted that this was all my fault. That lady has it in for me, just because I don't want to have kids. And it's the most ridiculous reason I can think of to hate somebody. I told Frank that I didn't want to talk to her anymore, and if she called again, then he shouldn't entertain it, and he agreed. Because there's just no point in trying to reason with her, she's beyond that. The second thing that happened was that we visited Ben at his house yesterday, in the evening, and for the first time, he offered us drinks. Ben usually doesn't drink because of his health. And we weren't sure if it was the right idea yesterday, but he insisted on it. Apparently, he'd spoken to a lawyer and was thinking of getting a divorce. It's a very big move, after 25 years of marriage, and we asked him if he was sure about it, but he didn't seem to care and didn't even seem upset. Frank was a little shaken up by that news and took some time to process it, but Ben told him that this was the best decision that he could make under these circumstances. He said that he'd been thinking about this for a while now because he just wasn't happy and Sharon was becoming increasingly annoying to be around. When we asked him how long he'd been considering a divorce, we expected him to say maybe a month or two, but he shocked us and said that he'd been thinking about it for almost 10 years now. He told us that when Frank was 20 and was about to graduate college, Ben thought that now that Frank was an adult and could handle his life and his finances, he could join his brother in a new business venture. Both of them had been talking about it for quite some time, but Ben hadn't been able to commit because he had a family to look after, unlike his brother. And had a lot more financial responsibilities resting on him that he had to think about, so he couldn't just quit his job and start a new business which could take some time to become stable. But after Frank graduated, he told his brother that he was ready and he was about to quit his job, but while discussing it with Sharon, she told him it was a terrible idea and made him back down. She said that they wouldn't know for sure if the business was going to take off. And Frank didn't even have a job yet, so he'd probably need money for a couple of years before he was finally able to settle down. He tried to reason with her and even said that he could probably work in the business part-time and retain his job. But she made him give up the idea altogether, and now, his brother who runs the business on his own is earning almost thrice the amount that he makes. They've kept in touch and there's not a day that goes by where Ben doesn't regret listening to what Sharon had told him. She hadn't even tried to talk to him but had given him an ultimatum, that if he took his brother up on that offer then she'd take Frank and leave him, which forced him to give up on that idea. His brother still wants him to come on board, but Ben feels like he's just too old. And he's going to retire in a couple of years anyway, so it's just not going to be worth it. Frank was almost on the verge of tears because of how dejected his father sounded while talking about the opportunities that he'd lost, just because he listened to Sharon, who wasn't willing to bet on a brilliant mind like him. And it's true, Ben actually is one of the wisest and most intellectual people I know personally. I knew that if he was willing to invest in something, then it definitely wasn't a bad idea. And it's being proved by his brother, who worked on the business idea that Ben created and is now a successful businessman. Frank suggested that he take up whatever position his brother was going to offer him, even if it was just a couple of years away from his retirement. Because at the end of the day, at least he'd have the satisfaction of knowing that he tried. Ben argued that it was too late for him and said that the position was not a problem because his brother was ready to make him a partner in the firm, but he was just not into it anymore. We were really upset to hear him talk like that, so Frank and I decided that we were going to talk some sense into him, and we kept convincing him that he should talk to his brother and join him. Because it was never going to be too late to do something for yourself. It was corny and preachy, but after a while, we managed to convince him to at least contact his brother about this and talk to him about it, which is good. As for the divorce, we're obviously going to be supporting him in it. Sharon can't just try and control everybody's lives around her and think that it's completely fine and she can get away with it. The way she treated Ben wasn't fair, and what she did to me and Frank recently is also not fair, and she needs to know and learn that she can't just push people around and bully them into doing what she wants them to do. It finally makes sense why Ben was so upset when she was trying to humiliate us at the party, all because we weren't willing to obey her orders. And even after all of this, she still has the audacity to pretend like she's somehow the victim in the situation. I don't even feel bad for her anymore because she's shown us that she doesn't deserve any sympathy from anyone. And all the people who are feeding into her delusions of her being the long-suffering tragic victim are probably just fools, or they only want drama, and that's about it. Update 3, Ben and his lawyer filed the petition today and Frank was with them. He told me that Ben was really relieved and they went out for celebratory drinks afterward. I have a lot of work to catch up on, so I couldn't join them, but I'm happy to know that he's finally living for himself now. The guy is in his 50s, he deserves to do whatever makes him happy, instead of constantly thinking about what his wife would say or how his son would feel. This is another reason why I didn't want to have kids, because I don't think I'm selfless enough to put somebody else before me constantly, and I don't think Frank is either. And then, there are people like Sharon, who are selfish and yet still choose to have kids. Just so they can control them and continue to put themselves over their kids. It's been a couple of days and we haven't heard from her yet, so I guess she's giving the victim act a rest for now. Or maybe she's just planning a theatrical and dramatic comeback. Knowing her, I wouldn't completely rule the second theory out. I just hope that whatever she has to do, isn't scheduled to happen before she gets served with the divorce papers. It'll be awkward if she decides to come back and Ben tells her that he wants a divorce. Frank and I have discussed the possibility of that happening, and we know that she's going to throw a fit either way, but it'll just be worse if she does it in person. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that she stays away for a couple of more days. Update 4, alright, so Sharon was served with a divorce a couple of days ago, and like I said, she threw a fit. Interestingly enough, it wasn't Ben that she was upset with, but it was me. I really didn't see that coming because I didn't think there was anywhere she could make this about me, since this was between her and her husband. But I guess I underestimated her, since as soon as she was served, she decided to go online and make a post about how I'd manipulated Ben into leaving her, and now all of us were probably going to celebrate because I'd won and she'd lost. I honestly wasn't even competing with her, so I don't know where the winning-losing thing comes from. And it's pretty disturbing to think that she looked at me as competition because she's a lot older than me and is literally my mother-in-law. It's weird. She didn't even talk to Frank or to Ben about it before she made the post, and there were like 3 paragraphs dedicated to how I was ruining her life by turning her loved ones against her. Only towards the end did she say that she was very disappointed with the other 2 as well, for falling for my manipulation and deception. It was crazy to me how everything in her life has started to revolve around me, and it's honestly kind of creepy. Frank has blocked her and so have I, but her relatives keep texting me to tell me how evil I am. It's sad because they think it bothers me, but it only makes me laugh at how stupid they're being. Even if I actually was a master manipulator, I couldn't manipulate someone into leaving their wife unless they actually wanted to deep down. And I guess people as stupid as them are forgetting that because, to them, it's only important that they blame me and paint me as the villain. Ben has apologized for it, even though he has no reason to apologize to me because none of this is his fault. It's his soon-to-be ex-wife's. But I appreciate the fact that he's trying to be nice since not a lot of people are built that way, especially in Frank's family. But either way, they're going to get a divorce, and blaming me is not going to change the facts, so the sooner she accepts it, the better it is for her. Frank and I are happy anyway, so if she's miserable because of that, then that's her own problem.